Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome and thank you for coming out tonight. I realize it's not the most perfect night from the standpoint of weather, but we also remember last year when we had a fire alarm due to water getting into the elevator and things like that, so we're thankful that you can be here. It's not quite as bad as it was. I know there are a myriad of things going on around town tonight. Sound of Music is opening. My daughter's got a swim meet, there are baseball games, all sorts of things. But thank you for coming tonight. And those of you whose events and commitments and other activities don't allow you to be here, we thank FPAC for being here tonight too. They'll be sending this out over the airwaves so other people can hear the things that we'll be contemplating tonight. I'll try to make this worthwhile for you. We'll not be planning any pay-for-view or anything that will contend with the Lakers game later or Mike Tyson fight. I'm not going to bite anybody's ears tonight or anything like that. But this is intended as a public service. It's become kind of an annual happening now, usually just before Father's Day. We're kind of celebrating manhood this week, I guess I'd say. And it is designed to be a forum for dissemination of information concerning men. Men are well represented tonight, so we thank you for coming along. All of you that are having a recognized interest in the male political party, and some of us are a little bit more involved than others, I guess. You're probably familiar with the old definition in eggs and bacon. They say the chicken's involved and the pig is committed. Well, we're all kind of committed here tonight. We're men. It's not just a passing interest. Hopefully the information will be of assistance to you. I'll cite some information tonight that's both old and new. Old truths are very valuable. Some of the information that I'll cite represent sources that are really quite recent in their origin. Medicine and health is very much a dynamic science. It changes from day to day. Many times, well, we were talking just before the discussion tonight about how some lab tests and some procedures have changed. People would not even think of doing the old rigid sigmoidoscopes anymore. Well, they might think of doing it. They wouldn't think of having it done on them anymore. So thankfully, medicine is a dynamic science. It does change. But no matter how recent some of the information may be or how old some of the information may be, I think it's important to recognize that for the most part, we have to have a sobering realization that implementation of action based on the scientific information that we have lags far behind what we know, far behind the knowledge itself. There are things that we'll probably hear tonight that some of us might say, I knew that. I should have been there and done that, but haven't yet. I just encourage your commitment to consideration of that. I also encourage you to keep thinking about doing these things if you're one of those people where we come up with something that we should be looking at, should be doing. Sometimes this lagging behind the implementation, lagging behind the knowledge is due to procrastination. Sometimes it's due to distraction. After all, this is the information age. Right now I'm told that the internet doubles every 120 days so far as volume of content. There are 400,000 medical journals published annually. I used to feel badly if I were getting a little bit behind with those. I don't so much anymore. 400,000 a year. The radio has innumerable pundits and panderers that vie for your ears. And then there's things like FPAC and, for that matter, tonight, this little forum. Knowledge is power if it's at the right time and if it's acted upon. Going back 150 years, John Greenleaf Whittier said, of all the tongues, all the words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. I always hate it when I have to look someone in the eye and say, if only, would have, could have, should have. That's not the kind of information we want to have. Too little, too late, it's sometimes said. A cute series of television ads that many of you may have seen, not on FPAC, no commercial interruption, I have to say, but the ads where the man's shouting "for" just as the ball hits his golf partner and knocks him down, or he pushes the garage door opener as he's driving through it with his truck, or he loses the potential wife of his dreams because he responds too late when she says, "I love you," and walks out of the room when he has no response, and then he says, "I love you too." If you've seen that, I think it's insurance commercial perhaps, or maybe market timing, something on that order. We want to be sure that you have the information where it can do you some good. So all of you look very young in here tonight. I thank you for coming at a time where hopefully this information will do well. Okay. All right. I also say, though, no matter if some of this information is something we say we should have acted upon 5 years ago or 10 years ago, hey, there's a chance. We're here. We're alive. Unless I've already talked you to death. That's what I'm saying. I don't see any people asleep in the audience yet. Tomorrow's another day. I didn't really write that down. You didn't hear that. I may have lost a few of you just on that one. Well, I picked out 4 topics tonight for our discussion. And I do want it to be a discussion. Initially, I'll probably run through this information and then just say there'll be some time for question and answers at the end. And that's always been a very fulfilling part for me, to see what chords we've touched in people, what things are of interest. It helps me for future years knowing what sorts of things people are interested in, what sorts of things are helpful to them. The 4 topics. In the first grouping, preventative health, screening exams, risk factors, and heredity. In the second grouping, a little bit about something called toxic success syndrome, distinguished from what we would call sweet success. It has a lot to do with stress, pressures in society, the fast pace of society. The third topic, responsibility issues for our health. Whose job is it? Or, if you don't do it, who will? And the fourth one, some interesting things about health scams, frauds, quackery, how to spot snake oil, these types of concerns. What information do we trust? If the internet is doubling in content that rapidly, is it all accurate information? Anybody out to hoodwink us? We don't like to be skeptical, but we do need to be discriminating in what we read. Now, to launch right into the preventative health care issues, maybe some of you saw the article in the Fairfield Ledger last week that I'd penned. It summarized much of what I'll go through, but I will reiterate it succinctly right now. Like I say, I know you all have lots of responsibilities and commitments. Going through much of this, I think, will be a bit helpful. Men have heart disease as their chief killer. Accidents due to enjoying, and I guess I'd put that in quotes, enjoying risky behavior is a close second. Men experience 4 out of 5 of all injuries from any type of mishap that involves motor vehicle accidents, firearms, drownings, fires, and often excessive alcohol is involved. Smoking is by far the top avoidable cause of death in the United States. It's responsible for 1 out of 5 deaths right now. 50 million adults still smoke in America. 400,000 annually die due to this. The number of adolescents and young adults who are beginning to smoke is nonetheless increasing. Numbers in older generations are diminishing, but there are fewer children coming up and more people are starting. Now, even though this smoking is increasing, I'll ask you not to fall off your chairs on this one. It might really startle you. Nicotine is addicting. This is brand new information. Never heard this, have you? Hot off the presses. No, it's terribly addicting. Smoke contains 4,000 elements. 200 of them are poisonous, and 40 of them are cancer-causing. Those of you that smoke, please stop. I plead with you. It's unquestionably the most important thing that you can do for your health. Even more important than this meeting. I hate to say that, but I wrote that down just so I'd remember to mention it to you. If you're thinking about smoking, act on it. Get some help, but get started soon. It is the most important thing that any smoker can do for their health. Unless they perhaps have a revolver held to their head already and the trigger finger is itching. I'd have an alternative suggestion then. Health tests and screenings. I then again mentioned earlier, we do have this handy slide rule card that lists timing for these types of things. There's no test at the end of tonight, I should mention too. But except when you go home. Now, what did he say I should consider about that? I am showing my age just a little bit here. No comments from any of you about that. But to talk about it as a slide rule, you probably never thought that an up-to-date, double-boarded physician would ever mention the word slide rule, at least not a physician that was still alive. But it works. It's not a website, and I would encourage any of you to pick one of those up as you head on out. I'll start with one that starts pretty young. For men, self-testicular exams should be started about age 12. And I say 12 and on. In the newspaper, I think I mentioned something about when I say and on tonight, I'm basically talking to infinity and beyond until the fingernails and toenails stop growing, which I'm told is about 10 minutes after we die. I try to remember to tell kids when they're in for athletic physicals and things of this nature that they should check the testicles starting at the beginning of puberty. That's why I say 12. For any lumps, any asymmetry, if one side is different than another, if there's any irregularity. For the very young, and that's a relative term. I've changed my definition of the very young through the years. But for the very young, those under about age 40, testicular cancer is one that's quite apparent if it's starting on up, and though not preventable, it's something that's detectable in early stages. So we try to get kids even in their early ages to be checking for that.
What do you look for?
Irregularities of contour, any sign of a lump that sticks off the testicle. It's not usually a third testicle or a marble floating free in the scrotum, in the sac.
Are we talking pea size or
Well,
walnut?
at the early stages, I hope before walnut. I hope, when a 12-year-old, maybe they can feel a BB. Just feels like a lump. In our age, well, again, if you feel something that's a pea, I hope it would be detectable as you just take your fingers and run around the testicle itself. There will be an irregularity where the vas deferens comes off of the testicle and comes on up inside. But that will feel more like a string coming off of the edge of a yo-yo. It won't feel like somebody took a pea or a walnut or a grapefruit and glued it onto the side of the yo-yo.
That would have been the same since you were 15 or something.
That's right. That's right. So that's what you'd be looking for. Now, skin checks. Maybe I should have put that first because even 8-year-olds can have troubles with skin. I was at a dermatology meeting years ago where a dermatologist who is well tanned stood up in front of everybody and said, "We have concrete evidence now that anybody who tanned to a burn and peeled once in their life has at least a 50% higher risk of skin cancer than those who didn't." I had to call him on it afterwards. I went up and said, "Do you know a child who hadn't? I mean, if you ever played Little League, if you ever mowed a lawn in your neighborhood, I can't remember the number, going to a friend's grandparents' cabin and getting fried. It happened." Basically what I'm saying is virtually all of us have a significant risk of skin cancer. Those of us of Northern European extraction who live in the Midwest where there's hot sun, hey, we're kind of an outside society. A lot of people that do spend time outside. Our risk for skin cancer is right up there. And as such, we should be checking for any change in a wart or a mole, any nevus or pigmented area that seems to be looking different than it did 5 years ago when we were 39 or 29 or whatever age we might have been. There was some airtime last weekend on the radio where they were reminding summertime vacationers in the United States that in Europe they have disclaimers. I don't know how they post one on the Sun, but disclaimers that are frequently placed on television and radios saying basically, don't suntan, stay away. It's been proven. The Surgeon General is warning you that suntans and burning can cause cancer, not just in laboratory animals, but in you. This reminded me a lot of what's on the side of the cigarette packages. And they're just trying to get the word across that that's an indulgence that we have had, to be very, very careful about that. The idea that a dark tan is necessarily the most fashionable thing should be something from bygone days. On the other hand, a lot of us can't avoid it. If somebody's out working in a field, if somebody's out gardening, there's going to be some sun exposure. Try to use some sun protectants, and I think those of us who burn easily know who we are. Others may not burn as easily, and they know who they are. But to protect your skin, we see an awful lot of people. I'll just jump on the farmers a little bit, say retired farmers who are 70 and 80 years old, and their arms have seen many summers of sunshine and many lumps and spots that come on up, and sure enough we biopsy and remove and freeze these lesions off. Cholesterol levels. There's a move afoot to actually get high school students to find out what their cholesterols are. I'd say probably before they go off to college, if they're not so busy with all their activities that we actually get to see them once before that happens. The triglycerides, the total cholesterol, the LDL, the HDL, the alphabet soup of lipids, of fats. To know that at an early age could be very valuable. A person can maybe be motivated by that when they go off and start eating dorm food, not to gain 70 or 80 pounds. For those of us that have left college a few years behind, we won't talk about how many years, but those individuals, it's going to be important because it defines what our heart and stroke risk is going to be in later life. So knowing that at an early stage, not waking up and smelling the roses when we're 55 and we think we might be having some heart pain or some angina, but at earlier ages when we can do something more about that. The good news is if we do find out that we have lipid levels that are high, intervened upon, those levels can be dropped, and actually we now have good evidence from the cardiologists that you can reverse some of that lipid plaquing, the cholesterol plaques in these vessels if you catch them in an early enough stage. Anytime you can turn some damage around, that sounds like a good bet for me. We don't know right at this point exactly what the norms should be for a 17 and 18-year-old. There haven't been enough of those graduating high school seniors that actually find out what their cholesterol is. But I just say, I mean, if they're already running at 200 at age 18 and they turn sideways and you can't see them, they're so thin, I hate to think what they might be when they're 65 and they might have gained 100 pounds and have a cholesterol that's skyrocketed by that time. Prostate-specific antigen. Probably heard it, PSA, age 50 and above, sooner if there's a family history or an ethnic tendency. I will say that family history increases that risk. It's the commonest cancer in men once you get beyond age 50. I mentioned testicular cancer is more common in the 20 and 30-year-old, but when you're 60 and 70 and 80, the prostate is the place that we really have to watch. It's an easily drawn blood test these days. Yes, we often alternate them with rectal exams done digitally to both check for colon cancer but also to feel that prostate. But the blood test is as simple as drawing a blood sugar or drawing a cholesterol. And we recommend that on an annual basis after age 50. Colon and rectal exams, about every 5 years after age 50. At younger ages, if there's a risk factor in the family, again, if your uncle and your aunt and grandmother and your cousin Lizzie and your dog and your cat all have had colon cancers, well, you better be on the sticks of, poor choice of words, you better consider having a scoping to look and watch. They will recommend doing, the American Cancer Society will give options such as checking for occult blood in the stools. But it's important to recognize that with a colon, which is usually shaped like an upside-down horseshoe, not drawn to scale, but with a colon, a cancer down in the lower areas will see a semi-formed stool up here, probably the consistency of peanut butter, by down here, again, semi-formed, a little bit more firm, and down here, depending on how much constipation lies in the family tree, it'll be fairly firm. A polyp down here or here is more apt to cause bleeding as it scrapes by. A polyp up here is faced with stool that comes out of the small intestine, and it's the consistency of pea soup. It'll flow right around a colon cancer, and you'll never know that that's there until it's in much greater size in much later stages. So the colonoscopy, which these days has gotten easier and easier, people perennially ask after the tests when are you going to start? I can just say, we're all done. And usually they intone something like, now come on, we've always trusted you. When are you really going to start? And I said, no, you want to see some pictures? It's not suitable for a family album, but we're all done. So it's not a difficult thing to undergo. Again, if somebody is Medicare age and has had one of these and it's looked fine, no abnormalities whatsoever, longer intervals up to 8 to 10 years can be considered. Medicare will cover those. But if people have polyps or pouches, abnormalities of any sort, or again with family history, tighter intervals are important. It takes time for colon cancer to grow, but it can grow a lot in 10 years. So we say a 5-year interval is closer to the time it should be. Chest x-rays. Now, why would we have something like that? Well, as a screen for emphysema, lung cancer. Usually, again, we're looking for a risk factor before we start recommending anything that would have some radiation, even though a very small amount. For those of you who smoke, I just say, remember what we talked about minutes ago. The best thing to do would be to stop if possible. But a chest x-ray should strongly be considered for those who do. You can catch a lung cancer in an early stage, and these days, much can be done with lung cancers. It's still not a nice condition to have. So I just encourage, try to prevent it from coming into your risk factor tree. Sex. Now we've got everybody's attention once again. I just say practice monogamous sex. This is not new news either, but it's something we constantly need to be reminded of. The dangers of AIDS and HIV are well known. They're well defined, but 40% of sexually active women right now test positive for human papillomavirus. We don't have a good statistic for men, but it's passed sexually. So we expect a comparable amount of men will have that. It's the cause of cervical cancer in women. A couple years ago we couldn't have said this quite so definitively, but it is. It is a sine qua non. You don't see cervical cancer without this human papillomavirus. And if you have it, there's no cure. I'm not saying cervical cancer. That's something that can be addressed and cured at early stages. But having the virus is there. It's there for all time. You just have to watch it very carefully. Women who have that are at heightened risk for cervical cancer. They have pap smears more frequently. Men, since actual cancer of the penis is not as frequent and it's more visible, will sometimes come in and say, what's this? And we say it's a venereal wart. It's caused by human papillomavirus. And it comes from contact with somebody else who would have that affliction. The only way to avoid that is to be monogamous. I tell people who come in and say, oh, this is awful, I'm getting married and now I test positive for this, what does this mean? I'll say, get married, that's fine. I mean, your prospective spouse needs to know. It won't go any further than the two of you, I'm trusting. And blush, blush, well, no, of course not. But it probably got there because there was some premature activity that allowed them to contract that condition. Herpes is forever. Still true in 2002. We don't have a cure for that one yet. It can happen to anyone. It is treatable but not curable. Nobody talks about safe sex anymore. People may say that's scandalized, but no, they don't. They say safer sex. The human immunodeficiency virus can even get through a latex condom. I say, most people, it's like taking a golf ball and throwing it at a chain-link fence. Actually, the dimensions of the virus and the size of the pores in the latex condom are very aptly described by that. I wouldn't want to stand on the other side of a chain-link fence and expect it to protect me from Tiger Woods hitting drives my direction. Some of them might be deflected, but a good many of them will start to shoot on through. If I had taken that type of risky behavior, I might not be here able to talk with you tonight, or if I did, I'd have black and blue marks all around. I also say, too, that the safer sex is saved sex, waiting for the right person. And I address those teenagers in attendance tonight, or those who are teenagers at heart. I also say, if you've priced Viagra recently, you realize it is kind of expensive, and you want to use it in the right way. Know your blood pressure. Get your eyes checked. Take good care of your teeth. These are important things. We learn most of these things in kindergarten. Flush after you're done. No, that the things that are of importance. Exercise regularly. And I say with an activity that you enjoy. We're not out to make a bunch of masochists. You know, some people say a man's got to do what a man's got to do, but there's no reason to make it pain. You want to not only do an activity you enjoy, but hopefully in a setting that is enticing. It's a setting that you're drawn to. There have been some interesting journal articles in some of the sports medicine journals stating that if you take your exercise bicycle or you take your treadmill or whatever it might be, and you put it in the deep dark corner of your basement where there's cinder block walls, maybe a crack here. Of course, even then you're stimulated. You say, I've got to patch that crack before the next rainstorm. But you're not going to keep up with that exercise regimen. You can just about be sure that there'll be a problem there. On the other hand, if it's in a family room downstairs, or if you can take the, right now you see all these Bowflex commercials on television, take something like that that folds up, tuck it behind the couch, and pull it out during your favorite television program, you'll stick with it. You'll keep on doing it. There are some studies that do indicate that the more you spend, the more expensive the equipment, the more likely you are to keep going with it. I call that the king's new clothes premise. I mean, sure, if you really invest in something, and nobody's going to want to say, what an idiot, he spent $100,000 on building his own gym, and now he doesn't use it. But I also say, look for the good bargain. There are a lot of folks who got exercise equipment and forgot why they got it. It's sitting out in their garage, and you'll see an ad in the paper, or you'll see a piece of paper stuck up on a telephone pole someplace saying free to good home. If you can get one of those, you're doing very well indeed. But many times, for a fraction of the original cost, you can get good, almost unused exercise equipment. I hate to say that, but it's true. A lot of it just sort of sits there and starts getting rusty. You oil it up a little bit, take that rust off it, and you've got a good machine that can help you. And there are other things that don't require machines. You know, get on outside, go for a good walk. If a loved one will go along for conversation, all the better. Park at the far end of the parking lot. Don't get there an hour early to find a parking spot that's right next to the door. Get a little bit of exercise. Come out to a meeting like this tonight. Get a little bit of exercise. Try to eat a nutritious diet, well-balanced, calorically appropriate. People say, how much is appropriate? Well, it depends on your activity level. If you're out for the Olympics, you need 7,000 calories, most of the sports. If you're sitting in front of a computer much of the day, then probably about a sixth of that will be enough. But I'm not going to tell you the type of food to eat, this type of thing. That's beyond the scope of what we're discussing to a large extent tonight. But if you find that you're starting to gain weight, you probably need to cut down some there. Well balanced. Most people that have had extreme diets have found that they're not going to feel good for very long. If somebody eats nothing but carrot juice for 6 years, they're probably going to have some major deficiencies. If they eat nothing but meat, there are apt to be some difficulties there. Know your heredity. This helps put you on alert for risk factors, such as diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol. Those three right there are the so-called deadly combination that we refer to as Syndrome X, and we're seeing a lot of it. If any of you have any Native American blood in you, the numbers are just skyrocketing there. People who get into their 50s and 60s and have, it could be 1/64th Iowa or Cherokee or Chippewa or any of these, much higher risk for that particular syndrome. We were well suited back in the 16, 17, 1800s, where we might have a meal every third day and live with a lot of deprivation and constantly on the move, constant exercise, to have those types of genes. But nowadays, well, we know in Iowa, how do we say love? You know, welcome to Iowa. Here, have something to eat. And we pass it out to folks. We are blessed and cursed by abundance here. So if people do have that type of heredity, know it and be looking for it. I usually, if somebody comes in and they again have Native American blood, I'm apt to tell them in their 30s, do you know what your cholesterol and your blood sugar is? Blood pressure is easy enough. We just check that with the blood pressure cuff. And I can say this too, hopefully men are used to being a little bit altruistic. It's not just for you. It's for those that come after you. If you know from your family tree that you've got some particular affliction, everybody after you can be aware. One thing we say with colon cancers, if there's somebody in your family tree who has this, everybody else in the family tree who comes after you should be checked 10 years younger than you were. If Uncle Ned had colon cancer at 50 and you're approaching your 40th birthday, that rule applies to you then. Don't take unnecessary and foolish risks. Buckle your seatbelt. Don't drink and drive. I think the coffee and cookies are okay, but these are laws we can live with, just things that we sometimes neglect just a bit. Now, I promised some information about something called toxic success syndrome, and this is something comparatively new. I picked up a book that was penned not too long ago, just last year, about this. And it's kind of a rampant condition in our fast-paced society. This might be a little bit new for you. First, a quote, that millions share the same forms of mental pathology does not make those people sane. Eric Fromm said that years ago. That's basically saying if we're a lemming and we're all going into the ocean, it doesn't mean we're safe. But this Dr. Paul Pearsall here, not an MD, he's a psychologist, he's a legitimate author. But he says in this book, he lists several symptoms. And I'm going to run down some of these for you. It's one of those things we say, we run it up the flagpole and see who salutes. This is a short test for toxic success syndrome. Your success is coming at the price of being insensitive and even oblivious to the needs of others. You have given in to the stressful pace of the modern world and see it as an inescapable requirement for success. Can't beat it, gotta join it. You vacillate from morning to night, from high energy to total crashing. You get yourself pumped up, but then you're exhausted later. You are critical and intolerant of other people. Don't take this personally, it's a question, are you? You are grumpy and don't laugh easily. Surely not. People are afraid to bother you if they think you're busy. You're usually doing several things at once. Multitasking. I mean, we sort of strive to achieve that in many instances these days. Somebody was telling me years ago Napoleon could be listening to one general's report at the same time he's barking out orders to two other generals. That's become our attempt in society right now. I've had executives tell me unless you're multitasking, you're not going to get ahead in the world. You have trouble getting and keeping your attention. Now, what does that mean? I mean, it means taking control of your own attention. You find yourself wandering from time to time. You think of time as money. I heard that from my dad a time or two when I was young. You're going to get out and collect on that paper out, or you're going to mow the lawn, and time is money. You don't touch and hug much. Now, hey, we're men. Not going to be group hugs tonight, but still, if we ignore those types of needs, if we don't reach out to others, we're probably ignoring something that's very deep into ourselves as well, or we've suppressed it. And that's one thing that men have a tendency to do, kind of suppress some of those feelings that may be deep inside. You don't talk much about spiritual things. There's more to life than what's in the bank account, what pedigrees we have, what we're doing, how fast we're doing it. It's important to take stock of what really gives meaning to our life, what we see as being important, what values we place, our morality, the things that we talk with other people about. Is it just sports? Yes, I know the Lakers and the Nets are going to be tipping off in a few minutes, but what is important there? Are you a controlling person? Can you allow other people their freedom? Or does everything have to be done according to the way your gospel reads? You have your own personal health and self-help program that does not involve others. Do you say, okay, well, I'm going to do this, and you do what you want to do, but I'm going my way? Or do you involve those that are close to you? Do you try to get them involved too? When I was talking about exercising before, it's a wonderful thing if you can make it a family affair. Do it together. Because you are so intent in pursuing success, you're at risk of serious illness such as heart disease or cancer. Lots of studies have been done indicating that people who are that driven are at much higher risk for high blood pressure, but also at risk for cancer and other things that we don't understand the mechanism of, but we know there's an association. So if some of those things seem like they might apply to you, I encourage you to consider it. It's a good book. Just about any place, Barnes & Noble or site on the internet, Amazon.com, they'd have these types of, just called Toxic Success. Short and sweet there. Dr. Pearsall says, success becomes toxic when it ends up costing too much in terms of what we say we truly value in our life. Success poisons our life when we begin slipping from a sense of ample opportunity to fully enjoy life into a nagging sense of constant obligations, and usually obligations to seek a better life. And I put that in quote because it truly isn't a better life. It's usually accumulation of things, just constantly putting our nose to the grindstone. If it becomes a grindstone, then maybe we're experiencing some toxic success. We say it's pretty hard these days to tell what it is to really, or what it takes to really bring happiness. Both poverty and wealth have been tried, and both seem to fail for most folks. I do see a lot of depression these days. Society is creating a very high stress level, which seems to correlate with depression. We often define this as a high-stress, low-control situation. High stress, many people can tolerate quite well. I think of circumstances, probably our highest stress would be something, for instance, in the operation, in a operating suite, doing some surgery. You realize a person is totally dependent upon you there. You don't want to make one mistake. But there's high control. You've got all the instruments you need. If you need the blood pressure raised, you can tell the anesthetist, do this. If you need some additional help, you can say to the nurse, here, pull here, move this. It's a high control situation. Most of society is not like that. You go outside and people are telling you how you're going to spend your time. Your supervisor says you have to do this many every hour. Other members of the family say, I've got this little list for you to do tonight. It's a high-stress, low-control situation. We try to deal with those and bring them under control when possible. We tend to try to escape. We lose ourselves, men are big for this, in our heroes. Sports is one thing we frequently jump to. But I'm going to define hero in a little different way. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Shaquille O'Neal or Cal Ripken or someone of that nature, but a hero is anyone who creates safe spaces for other people. Anybody who makes us feel good about ourselves or helps other people. They're really the heroes. A couple of Canadian marriage counselors, actually, Wayne and Mary Soteley, first worded that in that fashion, and I agree with it rather strongly, especially when we're talking about Father's Day coming up in just a few days. Try to create safe spaces for other people. That's really what men should do. We think about a manhood code. As it's promoted by Hollywood, it's pretty unattainable. You know, fathers knows best. Marcus Welby, MD, we hear about that every once in a while. I'm showing my age again, but maybe some of you still remember old Marcus Welby. It's pretty hard to be a man these days. No, I'm not going to say that women don't understand what we go through, but I just say it is. It's a study in contrast. We're supposed to be all powerful, all strong, but infinitely sensitive. It's different than the swaggering John Wayne of years gone by. And please tell me some of you remember John Wayne. many men will say, and I've heard them say this in the office, well, I don't want to show that feeling or that sensitivity because I fear that my family will devalue me if I show vulnerability. We're not supposed to be vulnerable. Well, guys, I know this will shock you almost as much as the addictability of smoking, but we are vulnerable, and we know it deep down inside. We don't have to wear our heart on our sleeve all the time, but it's there, and acknowledging it actually gives us greater power than denying it and pretending it's not there. Another suggestion that this counseling pair that I earlier cited made is it's been suggested that one of the best paths to happiness is to ask for and to grant forgiveness again and again and again and again. If we're always building up anger toward others, resentment, feeling that we've been wronged in some way, and we don't forgive them, not only are we hurting them, but we're hurting ourselves. If we fail to realize that we've harmed somebody else and fail to ask for their forgiveness, we've alienated ourselves. We've distanced ourselves from them. We aren't perfect. It's a good thing to do that and not to be afraid to do it again and again and again. I'm going to jump now to the third issue I spoke of, responsibility issues. I'll run through this quickly, but I really felt a need to address this right now. As I'd said before, if you don't do it, who will? If you won't take charge of your health, who will? Our society is positively inundated right now with attempts to deny personal responsibility. As I'd said before, implementing what we know lags behind the knowledge that we have. If we don't begin to accept our personal accountability for our health for what we know we should do, but just put it off on anybody else, then we're going to pay a terrible price, whether it's defensive medicine. Hey, I'll wear the badge there and say, I know there are times when something just has to be done because it's become standard of care. For a good reason? Probably not. But because people just expect that you're going to take all that responsibility. Health insurance. I'm sure everybody here has found their health insurance has become more and more expensive in past years. It gets passed along by the insurance companies. Liability insurance, going clear out of sight. After September 11th this last year, the largest malpractice insurer in the United States going out of business. Not that there was malpractice and the planes hitting the World Trade Centers and destroying them, but there were tremendous insurance awards, rightly so. Families were devastated. But that type of liability just couldn't be handled anymore. St. Paul Fire and Marine I'm referring to. It touches everybody. It's not just New York. Every practicing healthcare practitioner in in Fairfield that I know of was insured by St. Paul Fire and Marine before. And the company's going out of the insurance business now, so far as liability is concerned. So everybody had to seek out a new insurer. It's also severely impairing our ability to compete globally. Now, how can a car company in the United States that may have to put $1,500 to $2,000 per car into health insurance or into liability insurance begin to create a vehicle that can compete with one that's coming from a country where the liability situation is not so horrendous? We do need to take some responsibility for our actions and say, okay, well, I knew I should have stopped smoking, but now I've got lung cancer. I guess I'm going to get mad at Philip Morris or get mad at the American Tobacco Company for catching me there. Okay, enough pontificating about that. Health scams. Interesting little book here, Medi-Scams. I just happened to pick that up a few months ago. Talks about medical frauds and quackery, and it's alive and well. I say we are what we are willing to believe. We are bombarded with information, and we are victimized if we cannot discriminate between truth and bogus claims. When we're in a state of severe need, and I'll just say, for instance, pain, cancer, possible terminal condition, we hopefully have a trusted relationship with someone who knows us well. If not, we're just going to be cannon fodder for hucksters who will pander to our perceived need. Look for evidence, look for research, look for accountability when you're looking at research. If an internet site disseminates information but there are no sources noted, then be very wary. If an infomercial on television gives only anecdotal information, this worked for me. I lost 300 pounds in 2 days with this diet. Just send $30 and a self-addressed stamped envelope and we'll send you the secret of the universe. See it for what it is. It's really entertainment, if you find that entertaining. It's not information. Scams repetitively target the most vulnerable members of our society. The elderly, the ill. I said before, often with cancer. I mean, witness how many people dashed to foreign lands for Laetrile years ago in Mexico. Derived from apricot pits, never demonstrated to help. If you are wary, I don't want to set up an atmosphere of paranoia, but if you're wary, I can recommend it. It's by a Whitlock, Chuck Whitlock, Metascammed. He's been an investigative reporter for several years. Have to confess, he's a little bit harsh on the medical profession, but that's something I figure we have to hold on our shoulders. I just figure that I have to earn the trust of people every day when I'm discussing with them problems that they may be having and solutions and recommendations that I would have. I expect to back up the information. Largely with science. Science is a method whereby things are tested and things that are statistically significant and found to work can be recommended in similar situations. It's not as good as going out to your car dealership and saying, I need a new left front strut. They'll take the model number and the VIN number and they'll get the right part for you. We're all a little different. But I can usually quote statistics, well, the last 15,000 people in this study benefited 85% of the time by doing this. You might want to consider that. I do say, however, that slavery, to my knowledge, ended with the Emancipation Proclamation back in around 1862. Nobody tells you what to do. You choose your sources of information carefully. At least when I'm talking with people, I say, all right, team member, you're the captain. What's your choice? They might turn it back on me and say, well, what would you do if I were in your shoes? I'm happy to tell them what my particular thoughts are. But I think it's important that we're responsible for that choice. One other thing that I will say, and then we'll have some time for questions. For the first time this year, there's a book on men's health issues. There have been lots of others that have come out with women's health in the past. This is from the AMA, and it's pretty good. It's more encyclopedic than something you'd want to take on a vacation and read by the poolside at your favorite motel. But it lists, I guess I'd say, most of the things that you'll find on the literature out there are apt to be contained in here. It was just published a year ago, so it's up to date. And it runs about $35, as you might expect a book that size. But it's not a Bible, but it does have many sources listed. There are good bibliographies, good general information that's available. Well, again, I promised some time for questions here, and happy to throw the floor open. First, I do want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank the Hospital Auxiliary for making this possible. Yes, thank you very much. And also want to thank Chris Esseltedro for her work from the hospital standpoint. Jefferson County Hospital made this possible by arranging the rainstorm tonight so we can get people in here rather than being outside. But no, they've been very supportive in doing the preparation for this and all the legwork. I just have to show up and give you the information I have here. But any questions, things that we've touched on, or other burning issues, if they are near the surface, I'm happy to address them. We'll probably have to figure about somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes at a maximum here. But touched any questions tonight? Anything that anyone would want me to expound upon further? That's a loaded question. I won't be offended if you say no. But this is intended to be sort of a thumbnail sketch, a scrimshaw, if you will. It has to be colored in, and personalized to your own life. But I do think this framework is something that would be helpful. Yes?
Wasn't in your article you mentioned about the free digital prostate exams?
Okay.
Where are they?
Okay. I didn't mention anything about free prostate digital exams that I'm aware of. I mean, it's digital prostate exams are, it wouldn't be like a free testosterone level, you're thinking. Free as in no cost?
Just
no.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, no, must have been someplace different there. But it's a good screening test. The reason that the PSA blood test has become, well, reasons I should say, become so popular. Number one, it doesn't use a gloved hand and a jelly, which can be unpleasant for some, but it's not so bad. I don't know a doctor around whose finger is larger than the bowel movements we have on an almost daily basis. But the front lobe of the prostate is much harder to feel with the finger. The back lobes are what we feel through the rectum. You can press forward pretty hard, and that presses the prostate up against the pubic bone, the first bone that you hit if you take your hands and run it over your six-pack. You bump into something down there, boom. That's the pubic bone, where we push the prostate forward against that. And smaller prostate cancers are harder to detect. They have demonstrated that with the best hands, you're going to pick up a prostate cancer sooner with the blood test. It's just that it requires a needle, but hey, we're tough. We could handle that. Yes?
So are you saying that the blood test is more beneficial than the digital exam?
Well, I guess I'd say because the rectal exam, the digital exam, also checks for colon cancer, it has an added advantage. The PSA does nothing for that. What I often suggest, people who are high risk for PSAs, high risks for prostate cancer, probably should have an annual PSA. What I love to do is if I happen to catch them halfway through the year, if they're in for bronchitis or I see them at a basketball game, no, I wouldn't do that. But I'd say, well, you know, your blood pressure's looking pretty good. Let's just check the prostate while you're here. I don't recommend, and these are also standard recommendations, checking a PSA blood test within 2 days of sexual intercourse with ejaculation, or if a person has been riding a bicycle on something like ragbri. It just is apt to stimulate the prostate, and you're going to get some mild false elevations. But otherwise, if a person is in and they say, no, I've been sexually abstinent the last 2 days, and don't ask me how long before that, none of your business, then I say, all right, we can sure do the prostate exam and check at that time. If I see it's been 3 years since their last PSA, then what I often do is have my nurse draw the blood first. They come back in the room and we finish the exam. I didn't mention this, but a hard prostate exam, or feeling a prostate carefully, is also going to elevate that PSA. If you've ever had that done, where you've had a PSA done and then you're walking out and you tell the nurse, all right, now you're drawing my blood sugar and my cholesterol, couldn't you just do a PSA too? And they'll say, well, you know, we'll ask the doctor after we're done. They draw it and it looks elevated. Well, it's because the digital rectal exam had just been done. Okay. Yes?
I hear things like broccoli will keep you from getting stomach ulcers and all kinds of this. I mean, is there really a lot to that? Or?
Well, there's no question that nutrition is important. We know in people who are nutritionally deprived, major difficulties. Many of these sheets out here will list some of those specific things. Broccoli has also been implemented in prevention of colon cancer, so far as helping the stomach. People who, we're usually recommending, as I said earlier, not meaning to be glib or to brush over. Nutrition is extremely important. We are what we eat, no question there. We can be no more nor less than that. I guess we can be less because we excrete some of the toxins, but if somebody is drinking demon rum every night for half their calories, it's going to be hard on the stomach lining. Broccoli's got them hands down. On the other hand, if all they're eating is broccoli, they may never be president of the United States. I think George Bush originally said he had some distaste for that particular vegetable. There have to be other sources of antioxidants and other things like that that will be similarly helpful. A good balanced diet is usually helpful. We don't like people to be constipated. Definite correlation with colon cancers with constipation. Stress also heightens the risk of stomach ulcers, but right now you're probably familiar with a germ called Helicobacter pylori. We say many times, remember the helicopter germ. Helicobacter pylori is a germ that's associated with 80% of stomach cancers. A person may be just having no stress at all that they can note, but lo and behold, they develop a stomach cancer. One of the first things, a stomach ulcer, not correlated with cancer, but an ulcer. One of the first things we do is check for that particular germ. An antibiotic will seal the fate of that germ and get rid of that particular problem. That's comparatively new. An Australian physician about 7 or 8 years ago made that discovery, and it was, well, I was talking about scams at all. At first it wasn't believed until every other researcher that did the same work came up with the same answers, and they said, maybe it's not just a stress ulcer that we're getting. Maybe there really is something else to this, and in that instance there was. Okay. Yes?
That's one of these brochures.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned a fecal occult blood test.
Mm-hmm.
Simple add-on procedure. Is that?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying. Checking for a hidden blood test, hidden blood in the stool. Simply saying, when you look at your bowel movement, as we all do very, very carefully under a microscope, that's the most frequent answer I hear. Well, what does your bowel movement look like? Well, I don't look at my bowel movements. I mean, I go to concerts and meetings at Jefferson County Hospital. I don't spend my time looking at bowel movements. And the second most common thing is, well, no, they look pretty much red. Isn't that normal? Well, no. Usually we expect a brown or a green or a tan. But blood leaking from up here is not apt to be picked up from that because this is liquid stool going over. On the other hand, fecal occult stools are very effective on the left side of the colon, the downhill side of the colon. And that is valuable. If somebody is in a situation where they have very low risk for colon cancer, I'd say a fecal occult blood done every year after age 50, and then probably every 10 years, something like a colonoscopy. You could also have a barium enema, which is another way of looking at that. They're working on some technology now where you could swallow a camera, and as it would go through, you'd wear a little receptor right here. Now, there'd be a problem. I'd be worried if it were on the same frequency as FPAC. Suddenly you're spilling your insides all over town. But the problem with that is if that camera happens to get into the middle of a little bit of stool halfway through the small intestine, you're not going to see much. There are no windshield wipers. So the fecal occult blood test is a valuable addition.
What about the opposite, doctor, where you used to have normal, regular consistency stools, and they really softened up with no change in diet, no change in stress? What would indicate?
Well, there are several potential causes, but you've touched on a very important point as well, and that is a change in bowel habits. That is something that we usually try to address. Sometimes there is a hidden reason. You mean you didn't realize that antacid you were taking for the ulcer in your stomach was a laxative? Oh, no. Well, what about the number of prunes and grapes and dates and figs and raisins in your diet? Yes, those types of things can certainly apply. But a change in our stool's consistency is of importance. If somebody comes in and says, I'm having pencil-sized stools, or the bowel movements have a notch in them, I usually have to explain that one. People say, well, what do you mean? I'll say, well, say that you had a clay mock-up of what your bowel movement looks like. And I take a nail and I hold it and I just run the clay right by it. What does it do? It notches the stool. Imagine that there's a nail sticking in here, and the stool as it goes by, scraping it as it comes. That's the question of cancer. It can be a benign polyp, and here's the good news. Most polyps that we remove from day to day are benign. But they tend to deteriorate or degenerate into malignancy, into cancer, over a period of time. So we like to try to find those at early stages. Well, again, I thank you most heartily for your attention tonight, and hope you'll have a good, healthy year. Don't drown getting home tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Buck, very much.
Thank you.